Welcome, everyone. We're happy to be here today by way of EB5 Investor Magazine. On this webinar, our intention here is to discuss 956 approved EB5 investment opportunities. My name is Trevor Anderson. I'm the director of EB5 for HomeFed Corporation. We are a real estate development company, but we've been dabbling in EB5 now for the last 10 years, specializing in first position senior EB5 loan opportunities. And I'm honored to be joined today by Andrew Wall and Christian Trantofilis, two experts in the EB5 industry from different backgrounds, different roles in the EB5 space. We're honored to have them help guide us through this discussion today. But first and foremost, Andrew and Christian, can you give a little introduction about yourself and your background in the EB5 space? Why don't you start off, Andrew?
Thanks, Trevor. So I'm a registered representative under the Dalmore Group, and I run Dynex Capital. I've been in the EB5 industry for about 13 years now, with a primary role of supporting investors with project selection, making sure they have the opportunities that are both immigration secure and financially sound. I'm based here in Miami, Florida, speak English and Spanish, but we're pretty much at the point we've helped since I've gotten my license, 150 families through the process.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. Christian?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Trevor. Hi, everyone. I'm Christian Triantafillis. I'm a partner with Jackson Walker. I run the business immigration practice here at the firm, and we have a very deep experience and expertise in the EB5 immigrant process. I've been working in this space for nearly 15 years, working with families from all around the world, going through the EB5 immigration process. Experience working with investors, experience working with regional centers, EB5 projects as well. So happy to be speaking with you all today.
Thank you, Christian. So there's been a lot of talk lately about rural EB5 projects since the RIA came out a little over 3 years ago now. The rural projects have been a hot topic. But the 956 approved, urban TEA projects are still very much a great option for EB5 investors. So today we want to dive into the value that an urban TEA project can provide to EB5 investors and who that might be a good fit for. But first and foremost, let's start at square one and talk a little bit about what is an urban project? What's a rural project? What are the different categories? So, Christian, real quick, can you kind of talk us through the different EB5 investment categories?
Sure, happy to do that. So of the 10,000 EB5 visas issued each year, there are classifications within that 10,000, primarily created by the EB5 Reform and Integrity Act of 2022, in which the high unemployment urban area, the rural area, and infrastructure project was created to have what are called reserved or set-aside visas within that 10,000. And so the rural area projects are those that are outside a metropolitan statistical area and in a town with a population of less than 20,000 people. So you're really looking at that 20,000 number and just making sure that it's not within a city MSA. That is considered rural. High unemployment, you're looking at the census tract in which the project is located. There are ways to look at more than one census tract by kind of that bullseye approach of using an adjoining census tract with the census tract that the project is in to come up with an unemployment rate that's 150% or more of the national unemployment rate average. So that's going to be the high unemployment rate project, then or high unemployment area, and then infrastructure that has a rule that says that at the project level it's being developed by a government entity, whether that's federal, state, or local. There's some gray area the way it's written, but I think that's the most kind of basic way of looking at it. So they are allocated different percentages within that 10,000, rural at 20%, high unemployment area at 10%, and infrastructure at 2%. And that's advantageous because when the EB-5 Reform and Integrity Act was enacted, we didn't have lines in those new categories at the $800,000 level. And so foreign nationals from certain countries like China and India could get first in line again and start accessing those EB-5 visas without being stuck in long retrogression lines like they were in the past.
So what you're saying is all of these categories are current. There's no retrogression for these categories that you spoke of.
That's right. Now, there's the idea of invisible retrogression or visible backlogs growing because of the demand or the popularity that some of these categories have had. But today, if your I-526E is approved, you can, if you're abroad, start setting up your EB-5 visa appointment at the U.S. consular post. If you're in the U.S. and you're filing your I-526E petition, you can also file your adjustment of status application concurrently because there isn't a cutoff date. There's no retrogression.
So we talked about really three categories there. There is a fourth category, which is urban non-TEA. So what's the status there? Is that category retrogressed?
Yeah, so that would fall within the unreserved visas. So the rest of the 10,000 that are being used by those individuals who filed prior to the EB-5 Reform and Integrity Act of 2022, and whether they filed as a TEA or non-TEA investor, they're all taking up those unreserved visas.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't fall into, if you're filed today and you don't fall within those three set aside reserve visa categories, then you're going to be in the pool of the unreserved. Right now, that might not be so attractive because of the backlogs that are within China and India. But over time, as those backlogs clear, and if you are from China or India and you have filed today under a reserved category, you may find that one day the unreserved line shortens. And the interesting part that in today's EB-5 world, you actually have the ability to choose or toggle in between these two categories based on what's the shortest line for you.
So once you select a line, you can actually move lines, is what you're saying.
You can, yes. And I think it's most straightforward when you're consular processing because you can communicate with the National Visa Center. You have the ability to choose whichever line you want to based on what's been issued on your I-526E approval notice. You'll see the unreserved and then the targeted employment area or reserved visa category that you're in, and you can essentially choose which line you're pursuing and change that. When working with USCIS, it's less straightforward. You need to communicate that. You need to make sure that the California Service Center understands what you're doing in terms of trying to change that. It's not quite as a I would say, direct line that we have with the National Visa Center.
Okay. So better to choose the correct line from the onset. Andrew, you deal with investors all around the world, right? Different countries, some in the US, some outside the US. Me personally, I've seen very few infrastructure projects and urban non-TEA projects. But between these four categories, where are you seeing your investors most interested?
Yeah, so I mean, I think hands down, we're looking at rural projects right now. I mean, USCIS, we never know really what they're doing, but they have been pretty proactive in adjudicating the petitions for the Rule 526s in the priority line, averaging somewhere between 6 and 12 months. So we've seen the majority of them going to rural deals. But that being said, we have a lot of them that are looking at urban TEAs because they have some kind of association to that urban area, whether it was they're living there or they have family or friends that are there. Maybe they pass through for business or tourism and they have some kind of association to them. Maybe their companies are headquartered there and they think there's some kind of resilience from that company within that city. So we have seen the majority go to rural, but there's a lot of them looking at the urban TEAs as a possibility.
So I think I'm seeing the same thing, anecdotally. I feel like there's a lot of discussion around rural. Regional centers are pushing rural. Investors are asking for rural. But at least the data I've seen most recently on 526 filing indicates that there may actually be more urban filings than rural filings. Have you guys seen that data, or can you speak to that?
Well, I'll just jump in on that. I mean, right when the program was reinstated in 2022, I would say most of the projects that were readily available were high unemployment urban
Mhm.
area projects. And I filed a number of those petitions for, the first 12, maybe even 24 months. Once we started seeing rural investors really get that advantage of priority processing, the fast I-526E adjudications, we then saw kind of a switch over to rural being the primary filing going forward. But that being said, I think there were a strong number of high unemployment urban area filers um, for at least for the first year. I don't know, Andrew, if you saw that shift as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the concept is that the majority of regional centers are always focused on rural projects. I mean in urban projects. When they before pre-RA, everyone was doing urban projects. So once the RA came through and was active again, people already had these urban projects ready to go. While the rural projects, most regional centers weren't focused on rural areas, and they had to go find an opportunity in that rural area that fit the structure that they were looking for. So, like you said, I remember talking to investors early on saying, listen, there's a priority processing in rural. And they would say, well, what does that mean? And we're like, hey, we really don't know. The legislation says something around 6 months, but we have no clue if that's really going to happen. And no one wanted to take that jump into an area that they've never visited the city before, maybe even the state of that project, until they had some kind of clarity on the processing time. Once we started getting processing times, like you mentioned, people were way more open to that rural project.
Yeah, so early on, we didn't know what rural meant. We didn't know what the benefits would be to the investor per se. And the regional centers only had urban TEA projects on the shelf, right? It took some time to bring rural investment opportunities to the marketplace. So today, we understand there is a real immigration benefit for rural investments, right? You are getting your 526 approval faster. And there are plenty of rural opportunities available. So I think it's safe to say that rural is the majority of investments that are being made, in the last 12 months. And that's what I see personally in the market. I see a lot of investors highly interested in those rural projects. They want the faster processing. But this all comes down to, personal situations, right? So when an EB5 investor is investigating EB5, they have two primary goals as I see it. Their immigration benefits, right? They want to get the green card, and they presumably want it quickly, and they want to protect their investment, right? They want to make sure their 800,000 is coming back to them, maybe a little interest, preferred return on top of that. And so these are somewhat in conflict potentially, right? Rural projects, offer a certain set of benefits. Urban projects offer a certain set of benefits. Um, for myself and HomeFed, we've only done urban projects, right? As Andrew, as you mentioned, the pre-RIA projects were virtually all urban, right? And that was driven by the market, presumably. Uh, those projects were the safest investment, right? There was no reason to venture into rural projects because regional centers wanted to protect their investors. They wanted to provide safe opportunities for their investors. And naturally, that meant projects were based in urban locations. So, Andrew, you do a lot of diligence on projects in the market of different varieties all around the country. What do you see when you compare rural projects versus urban projects?
Generally you have maybe an association to comfort of an institutional lender on a lot of the deals that are in urban areas because maybe they're more comfortable, or you have a lot of banking institutions that are regionally focused into those areas that they understand the laws and the processes of that state or that city. We're also seeing, on the project level, a lot of these urban projects are offering a little bit more, like a sweetener, because they understand there's a little bit of a competition for the processing times. So maybe the actual commitment time in the term is shorter. Maybe there's a greater return. Maybe there's flexibility on a partial investment and timing on that asset. So there's definitely benefits to the investor in terms of just security in some instances. There's exposure from the regional centers. Most of these regional centers, like we mentioned before, have always been focused on a certain urban area. And they're kind of like banks where they're regional, right? So they have this expertise in that region. And as those regional centers venture out from their initial foundation of research and what they've done for a decade, maybe things get a little bit rockier. It's just they're not exposed to that region. Things like you're saying, you've been in San Diego for over a decade working on the same type of product. So you really understand that market, you understand the players, you understand the buyers of your product at the end of the day. In a regional center situation, let's say they go into a rural area and something goes wrong in a bad case. That regional center then takes over potentially if they're in a senior position of that asset, but do they have experience in that region to take over and find the right players to then finish the project?
Yeah, we don't want the regional centers necessarily compromising their standards of a good investment, by going to a rural project, right? There's this incentive to produce rural opportunities for investors, but we want to be careful, right? We don't want to, let the tail wag the dog, so to speak. We don't want to try and satisfy market demand at the cost of,
Yeah.
the integrity of the offering and the deal. And not to say rural's bad. That's not what I'm saying at all. There's a lot of great rural opportunities. But rural comes with some additional risks. Um, Christian, within your clientele, you see clients from all over the world. I'm sure. I know you do represent a lot of Indian investors, both here in the U.S., outside the country. Uh, do you see a different appetite for urban versus rural, depending on the investor's country of origin?
Yes. So, I mean, I think depending on country of origin does affect which one they might choose. I will start with though with whether the investors in the United States or outside the U.S. I think that a lot of times if someone's outside the U.S., they are their focus is speed to get into the U.S. and they might be focusing on rural as a result. There are families, though, who are still trying to finish up schooling and their kids have several more years, so they're not quite as concerned about it. And a urban project might make all the sense in the world to them. They're trying to buy time, really. And they've heard about the location or they know about the location that they're investing in, and that makes a lot of sense. If they're in the United States, they're going to have that um, those interim benefits of the employment authorization document and the advanced parole travel permit while waiting on the outcome of their EB-5 case. So in that scenario, it might make sense for them to just look at urban just as strongly or as interested as they are in rural. Meanwhile, others who are in their minds trying to beat an EB-5 visa backlog, where they might be from India, for example, and in the U.S. they think that rural is the way that they can get that done, even though we know that there's a backlog growing. Um, they think they might be one of those lucky ones who get one of those extremely fast outcomes before the backlog or cutoff dates are imposed at some point. But when it comes to countries, Trevor, um, I think Andrew touched on it by saying kind of the economics of the deal might affect an investor from certain areas of the world versus as compared to others. And if better economics are being offered by urban area deals, then you might see investors from Latin America look at somewhere like San Diego, for example. They're also familiar with San Diego, or Brazilian investors looking at projects in Florida that offer a little more return. They're familiar with that area, or right here in Houston, and we've got a Mexican community north of Houston that is very comfortable with investing in Texas and might be interested in a little bit more of a return. And a high unemployment urban area project might make a lot of sense to them as a result. They're not as focused on speed. They might have a very good lifestyle abroad. They have their ability to come and go into the U.S. as needed, And so when the green comes in, so be it. In the meantime, they're comfortable with their investment. I will say other parts of the world, throughout Asia, I think they've really been focused on rural projects more so than high unemployment. Although I think that's not I can't make such a blanket statement. There are some who are, I mean, and you would know. I know you're getting investors from parts of Asia and other areas of the world. So there are people who are still choosing urban area from Asia.
I kind
Yeah,
of
it's
have
a,
a question
yeah,
there,
go
Trevor.
ahead, Andrew.
So I actually had this question this morning, or maybe it was last night, but um, people are interested, Indian-born potential investors are interested in the urban projects. They wanted to know kind of at what age do you think it's safe with the CSPA to invest in an urban project? For their, at what age would their kid need to be, as at what age young wise, to be safe and not age out in their application in an urban project?
Well, the thing is the longer the I-526E petition is processing, the more it helps the Child Status Protection Act protect the child from aging out. Because if it's processing for quite some time, and if there is a backlog in the future, and by the time that the I-526E petition has been approved, if those cutoff dates advance to a close enough date that the investor filed, then that long pending petition has helped you. And so that's one part of the analysis. The other part is, well, if you're from a country where you think those backlogs will be so severe that once your I-526E petition is approved and you can't pursue the EB-5 visa for another several years, then that will likely cause an age out of your child who's close to 21 years old. So I mean, the answer to that question is, or at least the guidance to that question is going to depend on where the family's from and how old the child is. But I hope that adds some color on how to respond to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So and Trevor said he's filing potentially another project coming up. So it might even be great to get into a deal that's not even 956 approved. Um,
Yes, I
yeah.
actually mentioned that to somebody earlier for that very reason. If they're looking to, use the Child Status Protection Act, or for others who might want to do a partial investment filing
Mhm.
and they don't have the remaining funds available yet and won't have it for the next, 6 to 8 months. You have to be very careful if you're investing in a rural project when doing that, because USCIS is becoming more and more aggressive about when they open up the petition and the full funding isn't there, about what they're issuing in response. Notice of intent to deny, saying, "Show me that the full investment has been made within the next 30 days." Well, you better be liquid enough at that time to make the investment and explain what all is going on to fulfill the investment. If you're investing in an urban project, you've got more time before USCIS is going to open up the petition for adjudication, meaning more time to make the remainder of your investment.
Hey, Christian, real quick, I know there's been other webinars and panels on the topic, but can you explain real quick the recent change to the CSPA policy at USCIS?
It was that if you file your adjustment of status application um, based off of, well, essentially, let me rephrase. The date for filing chart, which is chart B, as we sort of informally call it, was a chart that you could use to show that your priority date, your filing date, was current, meaning there was an EB-5 visa available to you, and use that to invoke the Child Status Protection Act to keep the child's age frozen. And the reason that that was advantageous is because that chart B, that date for filing chart, is typically advanced further along than the final action date chart, chart A. Chart A is usually more backlogged. And so if you're able to show that your priority date is current on Chart B, which will then allow the Child Status Protection Act to keep the child's age frozen, you have more ability to keep your child in the process versus depending on or relying on the final action date to advance up to your priority date. It was just a way to have a more favorable date to use for your filing date to keep the child's age frozen in your process. But it wasn't applying to those who were consular processing. And so that was the discrepancy there, is you could only use the date on the final action date as a way to invoke the Child Status Protection Act as being current. And that was sort of a bad, a confusing discrepancy. And so while we were hoping that the government would clarify that actually they'll apply the same policy to those consular processing, they kind of did a reverse and they said, we'll just take it away from adjustment of status because we're not applying it to those consular processing.
So there's clearly some impact to some investors, but it's not a major impact per se. It's not going to affect all investors.
Not all investors, no,
Yeah.
because some investors, a lot of rest of world investors right now, for instance, I mean, they're not experiencing such a potential backlog in the future.
All right, so here's the question that I've been thinking on for some time now. We've established that rural's very popular and that it's been the predominant investment choice of EB5 investors for at least the last 12 months, maybe 24 months. So having said that, and also considering the fact that we're seeing the 526E approvals for investors in rural projects at a much quicker rate, at a much higher volume, let's talk about retrogression, right? So if all these rural applications are being approved, we know they have a larger allocation and a 20%. But if they're being approved at such a greater rate than the urban projects, is it possible that the rural projects retrogress before the urban projects?
I can jump in first. I think.
Yeah, go ahead, Christian.
Well, this is an easy response the way you posed it. I think yes, it's possible. I don't know. I mean, is it probable? Is it probably going to happen? I mean, at this rate, I think I could say that as well because I'm just not seeing enough adjudications on the urban filers. I don't know of very many, across the board that have been issued their conditional green cards or granted their EB5 visas abroad yet, versus the vast majority of my clients who have or are now conditional permanent residents post RIA are those who filed in rural areas. And I expect that trend to continue on. Most of those who are documentarily qualified, waiting for their EB5 visa appointments abroad, are also those who filed in rural projects. So the trend sort of starts to lean towards the 20% being taken up before the 10%. I mean, that being said, I understand 10% is less, and it might wind up that the high unemployment urban area backlog is more severe when it does hit than rural, but it is an interesting question based on the adjudications that we're seeing.
Christian, do you hear, or no, sorry, Andrew, do you hear any discussion around this point when you're talking to investors or regional centers?
Yeah, we do also. I just don't have the data. I mean, Christian part will tell you we can only get this data from USCIS with FOIA request. And even then, when we get it, we're delayed by 3 or 4 months on that data.
Yeah.
We've had so many spikes recently in applications that we can see where the investors are going. We don't know the quantity, right? But we know they're going into rural categories. We see the approvals coming in from my investors and others in the projects my investors are going into. And I'm not seeing that in really the high unemployment. So I think it only makes sense that you would get to a backlog faster in the rural category just because people are ready to get their green cards issued to them when they haven't even reached that stage in the high unemployment.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, HomeFed's had hundreds of EB5 investors post IRA, all urban. And we've seen very few approvals. I mean, it's been very frustrating. It's frustrating for our investors and frustrating for us. Um, and we can't explain it to the investors except, it's USCIS, it's out of our control. We know it's being processed, but it's taking time. Meanwhile, I hear about rural projects where everyone's getting approved, and it just seems like USCIS there's almost an imbalance. They're over prioritizing the rural investments over the urban. But it'll be
Yeah.
very interesting over the next few months and see if we do hit retrogression and which categories it affects most.
Well, and Trevor, just to build on that point about what's going on with the I-526E processing for the urban projects, one of the leadership committees that I'm on in the EB5, that was some of the discussion on when meeting with members of Congress and trying to promote the renewal of the EB5 program in 2027. Um, you know, kind of emphasizing the need to also focus on these HUA projects that make sure that they're getting the attention as well. Not to take away from the priority processing on rural, let it be. But for
Mhm.
those investors who are investing in HUA and urban projects, they need predictability as well. And I'm sure people in your position need that predictability too. You need to start seeing adjudications while managing their investment funds.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah, our investors, they want some, expected outcomes. It's hard for them to be sitting in the dark and not see results for their own petition or those other petitions in the same fund as theirs. So it's very frustrating and a little bit concerning as an investor. But I think we all agree that these things are being processed. USCIS will get to it ultimately. And for many of these investors that are here in the US, right, they're able to file for EAD and work authorization. So maybe it's not as big a deal for them. Um, but Andrew, when you have investors here in the US and they're able to file adjustment of status, uh, what's your recommendation to them when they're trying to evaluate projects?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much look at the financials of the deal. I mean, very straightforward. If you're happy with your advanced parole and your EAD, and you know it's going to come regardless of the category you're in the same time frame. So that's a question we get pretty often, guys, is people are like, well, do I get a faster EAD or AP if I go into a rural deal? I mean, they're the same at that aspect. The priority processing specifically focused on the 526 for
Yeah.
clarity. But yeah, I tell them look at the financials of the deal. And if you're happy with your EAD and you're happy with your AP, um, you just structure yourself and your investment on the protection of your capital and the return of your capital. Is there something that you can have a collateral piece on your deal that you feel secure about? Is there a shorter time frame for investment where you get your money back and then be able to put it back into the market and then make true returns? I think that's really important as long as you can get that EAD and AP, and that's what makes you comfortable. That's what I promote.
Andrew and Christian, what timelines are you seeing on the EAD and AP? What's the average processing time these days?
I would say on average 6 months. Um, I do see some very nice outcomes of 3 to 4 months,
Yep.
pretty regularly, but I I don't like overpromising. So, I tell people kind of an odd time frame of 3 to 7 months. And that is really where I think I'm seeing it. Um, and they can vary from client to client, of course, but I think that's the time frame. And a lot of times when someone really needs it just badly enough, they get it or just in time, thanks to the really pretty good processing of these applications.
Yep. Seeing the same thing. And then we even see variance within the same dependents under that application at times. So you'll
Yeah,
have
that's a
like
hard one to explain
yeah,
to
you'll have a
clients.
primary getting your EAD and AP in 4 months, and maybe just an EAD came to the dependent. And then you have the dependent husband and wife waiting to go on a trip somewhere, but only one of them has the advanced parole. So we've seen that often too.
Another question I get on that is, well, is it going to be any different when I do file, if I file my I-765 and I-131 applications together, at the same time as filing my adjustment of status application, or separately? Maybe I file my application for the EAD now, and then a few months later I'll file my application for the advanced parole. Is that going to affect the processing time? I haven't seen that it has. I still think that each one would get separately processed in that time frame that I mentioned. Where I do think the processing becomes a little less predictable on these EADs and APs are the renewals of these documents. I've got some that are processing for longer than I'd like. However, the good thing is mostly USCIS has been issuing these in 5-year increments, at least for in the more recent adjudications or approvals. Early on, when we were filing in 2022, 2023, it was really inconsistent how long these documents were being issued for. And so you wound up having a number of renewals being filed. But 5-year increments is going to be good enough for most of everyone who's already filed um, uh, in terms of not really needing to file a renewal in the future.
Is the process for renewal pretty simple?
It is a simple process. It's just frustrating when more than 6 months would pass and you don't have your new advanced parole yet. The I-765 is a different story because if you file, you can get an automatic extension on your work authorization for a certain period of time. And usually that comes in pretty quickly anyway, but it's that advanced parole that gets a little sticky in terms of, oh man, I need to travel and I don't have my renewed application yet.
How far in advance can you file for the renewal?
What is it, 120 days, I think? And the other is 180 days. So we try to, if they're both expiring around the same time, we try to both renew them at the same time. But if you have different validity dates on the two documents, you're filing them separately to renew as well. But, everyone likes that combo card. And if you get just that combo card of both benefits within the same card, that's very convenient, very efficient, and usually issued for 5-year increments.
Hopefully that 5 years is more than enough time for these investors to get their 526 approvals and move forward. But I think it's fair to say here that the ability to adjust your status to file the EAD and work authorization is a real game changer, right? That opens up the opportunity for investors here in the US to pick whichever project they're comfortable in and in some sense disregard the processing time of the 526, right? They can make sure that they're happy with their investment, that they feel secure in their investment, that they're happy with the rate of return, and put a little less emphasis on the priority processing. And that's what I generally tell investors when they're here in the US. Now, when they're outside the US, my typical suggestion is if you're from India or China, you probably want to look at a rural project, right? We know there's going to be retrogression, but if you're outside of India or China, it's a open menu. Take your pick, find the project that you're most comfortable with, that you're going to be happy with, right? This is long term. This is at least a 5-year investment in most cases. So pick the project and the regional center and the developer that you're comfortable with. Andrew, is that a similar direction that you tell your investors to go in?
Yep, 100%. I mean, it depends on their situation with their family and do they want to move to the US quickly or whatever the case would be. But the majority of those applicants, I let them know they can go into any option that they want. And then that gives them time to not only plan, but find schools for the kids, set up sales of assets that they have in their home country, tax plan, all these things if you're in a situation where you have a little bit more time. So they have essentially what you said, like an open menu to select from both categories.
Yeah. Real quick, and everyone in this webinar, there is a chat open if you want to ask some questions, and we'll start getting to a few of those now. But feel free to ask your questions. One of the first questions, yeah, go ahead, Christian.
Oh, can I just throw in one thing about the TEA? Just qualifying on that urban high unemployment urban area. When filing the I-956F application, you're putting in the analysis on how to qualify for the 150% unemployment. And the good thing is you've locked in that analysis on the date that you file the I-956F application as a project. And so the other good thing is investors can start filing as soon as you file the I-956F. Well, 10 days later at least. And
Mhm.
so that's a long runway of having that TEA analysis and getting that approval come in to raise your funds through EB5. And then on the investor side, um, you have those 2 years to work with from the date that the I-956F was filed. So, in the past, we were looking at renewals of those TEA letters on an annual basis, making sure it was still valid for the filing. It's another wrinkle to some of the analysis, but I think that 2 year time frame is helpful, for someone like yourself who has lots of interest from investors, so you can work with that 2 year time frame. And then from my standpoint, I'm not having to check with you so much on um,
Yeah.
those new data coming out.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up, Christian, because we have an interesting circumstance at HomeFed where our current project, we're going to hit that 2 year anniversary in November next month. We're very close to being sold out. We're not quite sold out. And
Hmm.
so we went in about 4 months ago. We filed an amendment to our F to extend that TEA status, which I estimate is probably the first time USCIS has seen that, right? Because it requires a long-term project that goes
Yeah.
beyond 2 years of fundraising. And I suspect that we're probably the only one that's ever filed that amendment to extend our TEA status. So there's a little bit of uh, vagueness,
Mhm.
in terms of what that looks like. Does USCIS respond to it? And we're under the impression that we filed that amendment, we proved that we're still in a TEA area, and that we're able to extend our status for at least one more year. Is that the way you interpret the
Yeah,
program?
I do think the RIA is very vague on what to do after the 2 years pass. That's been a discussion point as well that I've had with other immigration attorneys about how do we extend that? Do we really have to file the amendment? Can we communicate to USCIS in any other way? Um, and I think the most uh, cautious or conservative approach until we have further guidance is to file a formal amendment showing that it's still within a targeted employment area, um, or a high unemployment urban area, and then continue raising funds uh, once you've filed. So I agree with that approach. Is it the only approach? Will it be the only approach in the future if we ever get more clarity? Maybe not. I mean, maybe it turns out that all along we could have just emailed IPO and with the new analysis, the updated analysis, and say, is this good enough for you for us to continue raising funds? I mean, I've tried it. I've tried that approach.
Yeah.
Um,
Any luck there?
I got a confirmation that they received my email.
That's something. Uh,
Uh-huh. I think your approach, you've got the receipt notice, you got the proof that you're still demonstrating the unemployment rate. I think
yeah.
that's a strong approach.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it cost us $47,000 to file that amendment, but we agreed that that's the safest route, and we want to make sure our investors are protected. And so we believe that's the best way forward. A couple questions here that I want to get to before we wrap this up. Is the EB5 fees going to increase? I guess there was a recent article that mentioned this. What are your guys' thoughts on this, or are you familiar with this discussion?
Are we talking about the government filing fees?
Yeah, I think so, right?
Yep, yep.
Right. I mean, there was a fee study announced, um, and I don't know when, that'll all be released, or maybe a period, to a comment period on that. Um, I do think they'll probably increase. I don't know when and to how much.
Okay. Yeah, I know we saw a major fee increase, from pre-RIA. So hopefully
Right.
there's not any significant increases going forward. I mean, I think, we're basically funding USCIS at this point through the EB5 program. But we'll see. Time will tell.
Is there a possible fee increase similar to what we saw with H-1B?
Well, that is something that has been being kicked around as a way for the administration to promote the gold card program. You know, make it so um, pricey to file an EB-5 that all of a sudden the gold card looks a little more attractive. But remember, the gold card's a donation. You're saying I'm done with this $1 million versus 800,000 being an investment. Should be your expectation, or your intention, I should say, is to make a good investment to get those funds returned to you. That'd have to be a pretty hefty government filing fee to outweigh a $1 million donation.
One more question here. So we discussed rural processing time, maybe within 12 months. What do you guys tell investors when they ask, how long is it going to take for my 526 to be approved in an urban project?
I'm now at the point where I'm saying expect 2 years, and I let people know that I have I-526Es going that are adjudicating for more than 2 years.
Yep. 16 to 24 months. What do I say?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was there, and I'm not seeing enough at the
Sure.
lower end of that lately. I do have approvals on urban area projects. I mean, I don't have them going consistently on 3 years or anything. And I do have some that were approved as quickly as 14, 15, 16 months. It's just more recently, I find that I'm having more around the 2 year mark than I had before.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to try and tell people, 18 months, but I think the truth is we're more like 24 months now, and hopefully that reverses. Hopefully
Yeah.
that's not the trajectory we continue on. And I think we will course correct here at some point, but I never like to overpromise when
Yeah,
investors ask me.
I agree with that. I think, at one point we saw, um, I think at one point we saw rural project investors balloon into over 12 months pretty
Yeah.
consistently. And then after the initial really fast processing time, and then it kind of ballooned over 12 months. And now in 2025, I've started to see back to the 6 month approvals, 7 month approvals, 8 month approvals. And so hopefully we see urban do the same.
Yep. All right. Well, I know there's a few more questions here, but we're going to ask that you guys reach out to us directly. Andrew, particularly if you're looking at project diligence and have questions. Christian, if you're looking for immigration related advice. Myself, for any of the above, or if you're interested in the home fed EB5 investment opportunities. We appreciate all of you guys joining us today. Thank you, Andrew and Christian, for your contributions, and hopefully we'll see you guys again soon.
Thanks, Trevor. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Trevor. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye.